one anticipated the subsequent events that transpired when a destitute child yelled, "Do not consume that." The park cafe was a magnet for the city's aristocracy. It was midday, and the cafe was alive with activity. Nestled between rows of meticulously maintained trees and the gentle murmur of a nearby fountain, waiters in immaculate uniforms gracefully navigated between tables, delicately balancing platters of freshly brewed coffee and artisanal dishes. The air was scented with the subtle sweetness of blossoming blossoms and the aroma of warm bread. However, for one individual, none of this appeared to be noteworthy. Bernard Green, a name that is synonymous with wealth and influence, was seated at a prominent table in the center. He had established his empire from the ground up, beginning with real estate in his 20s and subsequently expanding into enterprises that were beyond the reach of most. He exuded the assurance of an individual who not only controlled his own world, but potentially the worlds of those around him. At the age of 72, his gold-rimmed spectacles and tailored suit were indicative of a life of opulence. Nevertheless, his movements were sluggish and almost hesitant as he examined the menu. He was seated across from his wife, Marissa, who was considerably younger, a woman who appeared to have been taken from a magazine cover. Her visage was impossibly polished, framed by her jet-black tresses, her meticulously applied vibrant red lipstick. Every inch of her exuded sophistication, however. Her smile did not quite extend to her irises. She absent-mindedly spun a diamond bracelet on her wrist, her focus centered on her phone screen rather than her spouse. A youngster remained in close proximity, just beyond the patio fence. His oversized windbreaker was loosely draped over his slender frame, and he was diminutive for his age. His dark eyes moved from table to table, examining plates and pockets in search of an opportunity. Although no one in the cafe was acquainted with him, his name was Malik. On this street, his visage was all too familiar, a child who was perpetually on the periphery of conversations and the fringes of concern, as he had nowhere to go. Bernard briefly examined his wristwatch. He spoke in a calm yet pointed tone. "You are once again distracted." Marissa's smile was devoid of sincerity. As she glanced upward, she replied with a charming smile, reaching across the table to lay her hand on his. "You are aware of my enthusiasm for these lunches." Malik's innards roiled. He approached the patio balustrade, his footfall nearly imperceptible as he leaned against it. Bernard's table caught his attention. It was a luncheon that he had not observed in person in several months. A sparkling water tumbler and fresh bread accompany an immaculate white basin of soup. However, an extraordinary event transpired. Marissa's hand slid into her designer handbag as Bernard adjusted his spectacles and picked up his phone. She closed her fingers around a small vial, as Malik observed. Her hand was ever so slightly tilted over the scalding bowl as she casually flicked it open. In an instant, the liquid dissolved into the broth, as if it had never existed. Malik's breath was seized. He was frozen as he observed her stir the soup with the utensil, her expression remaining unaltered. She then drew closer to Bernard, her voice barely audible but still audible. "After all the hardship I have endured, you will not jeopardize this opportunity." The youngster was uncertain about the events he had just witnessed, and he blinked. Was this a genuine occurrence? Could a woman who appeared to be in a state of perfection, seated in a place that was so well maintained, truly be in the position she was in? However, Malik was unable to escape the sensation that something was profoundly amiss. Malik lowered himself behind the railing, his heart pounding in his chest. He was uncertain as to the nature of the scene he had just witnessed. However, the manner in which the woman's voice conveyed those chilling words caused him to tremble. He clenched his fists, his talons burrowing into his palms. No one else had observed. No one else had been paying heed. He was the sole individual. His eyes remained fixated on the couple, but the faint rumbling in his stomach jolted him back to reality. Bernard appeared fatigued and disoriented, his spoon hovering above the basin as he examined his phone. Marissa was once again all charisma and poise. Her smile was bright, and her hand was resting on her chin as if she had not just murmured something terrifying moments ago. Malik could sense the decision's weight bearing down on him. His instinct encouraged him to withdraw. What is the benefit of participating? A youngster in a threadbare hoodie, standing at the outskirts of a world that did not embrace him. Who would believe him? He forced a hard swallow, observing the other patrons' mirth, conversation and the clinking of glasses. No one was concerned. He was entirely unnoticed. However, his attention was redirected to Bernard's utensil, which was now submerged in the broth. Malik perceived a contraction in his thorax. It was not merely his imagination. He had observed her pour something into it. He understood the consequences of the elderly man consuming a morsel. His mind was in a state of excitement. He was unfamiliar with this individual, however. This was of no consequence. Wrong was incorrect. Malik abruptly propelled himself off the railing, and proceeded directly to the table, as the moment seemed to extend indefinitely. His feet continued to move, despite the fact that his legs felt as hard as lead. He bellowed, his voice cracking, "Refrain from consuming that." The heads of individuals were turned. The conversation was terminated in the middle of a sentence. Through the café, the clamor of a dropped fork reverberated. Bernard's wide eyes were fixed on the child, and he froze, his spoon hovering just inches from his mouth. Marissa's expression hardened as she whipped her head. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice so sharp that it could penetrate glass. Malik maintained his composure. Although his voice was trembling, it was audible to all. "She incorporated an ingredient into your meal. She was visible to me. Refrain from consuming it." The café was filled with gasps, as each patron turned to observe the scene. The silence that ensued was oppressive. Malik's chest heaved as adrenaline tore through him, but he stood his ground. Bernard blinks, his gaze shifting between his wife and the youngster. "Marissa, what is he discussing?" His tone was composed, but his hand trembled as he placed the spoon on the table. Marissa's composure was like a rubber band that had been stretched too thin, and it shattered. The sound of her chair scraping against the stone floor caused her to leap to her feet. She muttered, her voice dripping with malice, "You little liar, how dare you accuse me of something so vile? Who permitted you to enter this location?" Despite the word's stinging effect, Malik refused to back down. He was fervently trying to convince Bernard of the truth, and his eyes were fixed on him. "Her presence was observed by me," he stated, his voice becoming more steady as he spoke. "She added an item to your soup while you were not paying attention. If you are skeptical, you can detect it." Bernard's irises narrowed as he turned toward his wife, and his features paled. "Marissa, what is the matter?" With a quiet yet determined tone he inquired. She sneered and waved a dismissive hand. "He is merely attempting to cause trouble." She spat on Malik, her gaze flickering to him with open disdain, the words like poison themselves. "Look at him, he probably just wants money or food." However, the youngster maintained his composure. He approached the table with his fists clenched. He said firmly, his voice rising, "I'm not lying. She wishes to conceal the information from you. However, I observed every detail." Bernard's hand hovered over the basin, divided between disbelief and the nagging doubt that was eroding his mind. Yet, there was something in the boy's voice that caused him to become agitated. The atmosphere surrounding the table appeared to become more dense. The café, which was previously bustling, was now ominously silent. Their meals were ignored as all eyes were captivated by the unfolding drama. Bernard's gaze was fixed on the youngster, as he reclined back slightly in his chair. His countenance was characterized by the signs of an individual who was accustomed to individuals seeking to exploit his wealth by engaging in games with him. However, this was distinct. The lad maintained his composure and refrained from turning his gaze. "Malik, is that correct?" Bernard inquired, his voice remaining unwavering, despite a slight undercurrent of suspicion. The boy nodded. "Certainly. I am being entirely candid. Kindly." He spoke softly but firmly. "Do not consume it." Marissa crossed her arms and let out a piercing chuckle as she fixed her gaze on Malik. Her tone was icy as she hissed, "This is absurd. He is merely a street child who is seeking attention. Bernard, are you truly willing to tolerate this absurdity?" However, Bernard declined to respond. Instead, he retrieved the utensil once more, this time holding it in a more intimate position. His hand trembled slightly, but it was not due to fear. Rather, it was a result of the quiet tempest that was developing within him. "Marissa," he said slowly, his eyes alighting on hers, "you heard him. What is the precise situation?" Marissa's lips were pressed into a thin line as her poised facade fractured further. "I am astounded that you are even considering asking me that." She turned to the escalating throng and said, "It is insulting." Her volume rose. "He is deceiving. Look at him. It is probable that he is unaware of your identity. Why would you give him your trust in lieu of mine? The weight of her words lingered in the air, but they failed to produce the desired outcome. The members of the audience were now murmuring, their gazes alternating between the three of them. The air was filled with whispers. Did she truly commit the act? Observe her. She appears to be experiencing anxiety. That boy does not appear to be fabricating this information. Marissa's rage was only intensified by the murmurs. Her immaculate demeanor was shattered as she slammed her palms on the table. Enough of this. Bernard, consume your broth and let's depart, she hissed, her voice shaking with fury. However, Malik refused to concede. He continued to advance, his fists clenched tightly. He said, his voice rising with urgency, if you don't believe me, then call someone to test it. You are wealthy. You have access to lawyers, doctors, and individuals who are capable of resolving the matter. However, refrain from consuming it. If you do, you will rue your decision. Bernard's mandible contracted as he returned to the basin. The utensil was still in his hand, but he refrained from bringing it to his lips. His wife's gaze was drawn to his weary and calculating eyes. Marissa, he said, his voice subdued, you have been behaving in an unusual manner for the past few weeks. This, she fumbled over her words and her face reddened. I am unaware of the subject matter you are discussing. It is impossible for you to believe that I would intentionally contaminate someone. In a razor-sharp tone, Bernard concluded for her, me. The crowd's murmurs intensified as they gasped audibly. Malik's gaze was unwavering, and he stood steadfast. He could sense his heart beating, but he refrained from revealing it. He did the best he could. Bernard was now responsible for making the subsequent decision. Marissa's expression hardened into a frigid and unfamiliar quality as she straightened up. This is absurd. I do not have to sit here and listen to this nonsense, she said, reaching for her purse. However, Bernard's hand suddenly emerged, firmly grasping her wrist with an astonishing amount of force for a man of his age, preventing her from departing. He stated with firmness, you are not going anywhere. Not until we have resolved this matter. After being immobilized in position, the waiter finally spoke. Sir, should I contact the police? For the first time, Marissa appeared to be in a state of genuine distress. As the query reverberated throughout the café, she vehemently shook her head. You are not allowed to do so. This is merely a misinterpretation. Bernard, you are not capable of taking this matter seriously. However, Bernard raised his hand, effectively silencing her. Yes, he informed the attendant, his gaze remaining fixed on Marissa. Phone them. Malik experienced a brief moment of relief. The tension was far from resolved, and the truth had not yet been revealed. The waiter raced inside to make the call, and the café collectively held its breath. Bernard relinquished Marissa's wrist, his gaze remaining fixed on her. The once polished charisma that she wore so effortlessly was now unraveling, replaced by a mounting sense of desperation. She looked around, her lips moving, but no sound emanating, as if she were in quest of an escape. In the interim, Malik's hands were slightly trembling. As he stood a few steps back, he had exhausted himself. However, the weight of doubt was now beginning to seep in. What if the individual ultimately did not believe him? What if she were able to negotiate her way out of this? He clenched his fists, compelled himself to remain unmoving. Bernard abruptly spoke, his voice breaking through the tension. Malik, you stated that you observed her add an item to the soup. Could you provide a detailed explanation? Stepping forward, the lad swiftly nodded. It was a diminutive bottle, similar to one that would be employed for medication. Poured the clear liquid into the container, while you were distracted by your phone, and then stirred it. I am positive that I caught sight of it. Bernard's expression became increasingly tense. Marissa was already shaking her head when he turned to her. This is absurd. Why would I? However, Bernard interrupted her. What could he possibly gain from this? Why would he lie? The charged atmosphere was further exacerbated by the distant sound of sirens, and the crowd murmured once more. The sound caught Marissa's attention, and for a brief moment, her meticulously crafted facade was completely dislodged. She appeared to be in a precarious position. Subsequently, she approached Malik with the appearance of clutching at straws. You have been monitoring us, have you not? Your motive is to incite trouble because you are envious of those who possess something.
The word struck Malik like a blow, but he maintained his composure. He stated unequivocally, "I am not envious. I observed what I saw, and I was unable to remain idly by, and allow you to inflict harm on him." Eventually, 2 police officers entered the cafe. As the alarms became increasingly deafening, their hands were lying on their belts as they approached the table, and the room appeared to contract. One of them inquired, his tone neutral but authoritative, "What is the situation?" Despite his advanced age, Bernard's imposing stature continued to inspire admiration. "Officers, I require your attention to this," he stated, pointing to the bowl of soup. "This boy alleges that my wife poisoned it." The officers exchanged glimpses, their expressions remaining deliberately expressionless. One of them cautiously sniffed the bowl before turning to Marissa. "Madam, do you have any comments on this?" The color of her visage changed to crimson. "This is absurd. He is merely a street child who is attempting to cause trouble. Bernard, are you truly willing to allow this absurdity to escalate?" However, the officer did not accept her deflection. "We must evaluate the contents," he stated, reaching for the basin. Marissa's voice rose as she yelled, "No." The sudden distress only served to emphasize her remorse, and the outburst garnered even more attention. The officer's gaze narrowed as he paused. "Ma'am, is there anything you would like to share with us before we continue?" Marissa hesitated, her chest fluctuating swiftly. She gazed at Bernard, and then at the officers, her hands quivering as she gripped her handbag. Ultimately, her resolve was shattered. She spat, her voice low and venomous. "Fine," she said, "you desire the truth. I am weary of living in his shadow, and of his control over everything. He was never expected to survive this year, and She abruptly ceased, only to realize that she had spoken excessively. The cafe was erupting in murmurs, with some patrons reaching for their phones to capture the moment. The weight of her confession struck Bernard like a vehicle, causing his face to turn pallid. The officer approached, his countenance bleak. "Ma'am, I am apprehending you for attempted murder. Please place your hands in a position that allows me to observe them." Marissa's equilibrium was destroyed entirely. She shrieked, attempting to wiggle free, as they secured her wrists behind her back. Her voice echoed throughout the astonished cafe as they led her away, shouting, "You don't understand. I deserved everything. He had everything." Bernard slid back into his chair, his hand trembling as he shoved the soup away. He maintained silence for a brief period, his expression betraying bewilderment and betrayal. Malik, who was hesitant of what to do next, was transfixed in place when his eyes caught sight of him. The wrath in Bernard's expression was displaced by a fleeting moment of gratitude as his gaze relaxed. Not only had Malik saved his life, but he had also disclosed a truth that Bernard would never have anticipated. The cafe gradually reverted to a low hum of murmurs and whispers as the officers escorted Marissa out, her objections dissipating into the distance. Patrons exchanged wide-eyed glimpses, still bewildered from the events they had just witnessed. Some individuals gazed upon Bernard with sympathy, while others were intrigued. However, Malik refrained from proceeding. He remained anchored to the ground, uncertain as to whether he was to remain or discreetly depart. Bernard's eyes were now steady, but his visage remained pale. He turned to the lad. "Malik," he said gently, gesturing to the seat across from him, "please sit." Malik hesitated, casting a glance at the observers. However, Bernard's voice exerted an influence that compelled him to comply. He gradually sank into the chair, his shoulders tensed. Bernard stated, "You saved my life," with a firm yet subdued voice. "I am uncertain as to how I will ever be able to repay you." Malik trembled, his hands clenching the table's edge. I couldn't allow it to happen," he said quietly. "I was unable to remain silent and observe." Bernard nodded, his gaze briefly averted, as if reliving the entire ordeal in his consciousness. "The majority of individuals would have," he stated after a brief pause. "They would have concealed their eyes, and pretended they were unaware, but you did not. That required courage, young man." Malik's voice was scarcely audible, as he shrugged. I don't like seeing people get hurt, that's all." Bernard leaned back and examined the child. For the first time he appeared to truly perceive him, not merely as a tenacious street child, but as an individual with a narrative, a essence. "For how long have you been present here?" Malik was taken aback by the inquiry. He turned away, his voice tainted with humiliation. For a period of time, Bernard frowned, but refrained from inquiring further. Instead, he reached into his pocket and extracted an elegant black phone. He stood and stepped aside to make a call, saying, "Please wait here." Malik observed him, uncertain about his next course of action. His heart was pounding with apprehension. Was he currently in trouble? Was Bernard planning to contact an individual to arrange for his removal? However, Bernard's demeanor was composed, almost empathetic. When he returned, "Assistance is imminent," he stated succinctly. Malik inquired, his brow furrowing. "Help?" Bernard acknowledged. "I reached out to a trusted individual, who will ensure that you have a secure place to stay tonight. Additionally, I would like to offer you additional assistance, if you permit." The boy's pupils grew ecstatic. "You are not required to do that," he said abruptly, his tone combative. "I did not engage in this activity for financial gain or any other reason." Faintly, Bernard smiled. "I am aware. That is why I am motivated to assist you. You accomplished an act that many individuals would not have, and I am confident that the world would be a much better place if there were more individuals like you, Malik." Malik experienced an indescribable warmth for the first time in a long time. He gazed downward, uncertain about what to say. The cafe patrons began to disperse, but the impact of the incident continued to persist in the air. Bernard retrieved his glass of water and sipped it slowly before resuming his conversation. He stated, "Occasionally, life presents us with the opportunity to alter the narrative of another individual." His tone was contemplative. "You altered mine today, Malik, and perhaps, just possibly, I can assist in altering yours." The lad peered up at him, his dark eyes sparkling with an emotion that he had not experienced in years. Hope. The sun's trajectory across the sky continued as the two sat in silence, casting long shadows across the cafe. Anyone who had observed the event was aware of the lesson. Courage is not always associated with a suit, and compassion is not always exhibited by the affluent. Occasionally, the individuals we fail to recognize possess the most significant fortitude. Ultimately, Malik's courage not only saved a life, but it also served as a reminder to all in the cafe of the importance of advocating for what is right, regardless of the circumstances.